I want to move us to something, or go back to something you said earlier, but it's kind of about the one of your criteria being young leaders, and I think that's another really interesting conversation. I know I'm um, always so inspired by New Deal leaders across the country, including you, who are doing really cool things, and and then B, bringing a really important perspective. So I'll tee up one, and then I'd love to hear a little bit why you think it's so important that we invest in young leaders in this generational change. And of course, I'm always like trying to move up the number a tiny bit as I get older, because I feel like I'm still young at heart and I count. But I remember interviewing Will Haskell for this podcast actually a while ago. Will was the youngest state senator in Connecticut history, as you know, and we were talking about that fact and that his role in the legislature for given that fact. And one of the things he said that I will never forget was that he said, there's two things that kind of set me apart. I'm the only renter in my caucus, and I'm the only person who's gone through school shooting drills in my caucus, right, as a high school student. And so, to sit with that for a second, right? Like, here you have somebody who's bringing a perspective when you're talking about housing, affordable housing legislation, and you don't literally have another person in the caucus that is renting, which so many people are, or the same thing with, like, when you're talking about gun safety. So anyway, for me, it's like, it's so apparent about why it's so important that we have young people, young voices. It's just a different perspective that is critically important to have represented. So that's my story, but love to kind of hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, I totally agree. And look, I mean, I was in grade school when Columbine happened. I remember doing school shooting, drills when I was in elementary and junior high school. I believe I was the only renter in the Senate when I was elected to the state Senate back in 2018. I was the youngest member of the Iowa Senate when I was elected. 7 years later, I'm still the youngest member of the Iowa Senate.
That's
Um,
wild. I did
I
not know
was
that. I knew the first part, but not the second part of that sentence. Wow.
I had the pleasure of serving as the youngest ever Senate Minority Leader, Senate Caucus Leader, and I'm the youngest ever former Senate Minority Leader in Iowa. And so, yeah, you bring a different perspective, and it's true on the lived experience piece, which is what we're talking about in terms of those, being in grade school and Columbine happened and those sorts of things. It also is true when it comes to meeting voters where they are. If you are somebody who has never had or hasn't recently had to go through the process of like buying a home,
Yeah.
or like right now, like my wife and I are paying for childcare for our 1 year old, it's really expensive. And it's when we talk about the cost of living crisis that is facing this country, that is being acutely felt, I think, by Americans of all ages, but it's being felt, I think, most acutely by young Americans who are trying to get started. And I think when you look at the fact there's some data that was released recently by Blue Rose Research, David Shore's outfit, that found a very sharp turn among young voters in this most recent election. I think a big part of explaining that is, for them, this affordability crisis that in their eyes got much worse when Joe Biden was president, and that they did not see a compelling story from Vice President Harris about how she was going to tackle those things. And so I think as a party, it's critically important that Democrats take that really seriously
Yeah.
and focus on those issues. And then I think communicate with voters in a way, young voters in particular, that they are able to receive. And a lot of that's coming on social media, TikTok, Instagram. I guess Facebook is not necessarily the platform anymore, but a lot of these places are where those conversations are happening. Podcasts like this one,
Hmm.
again, may not necessarily be top of mind for like normal young people or what have you, but being fluent in these kinds of platforms and media is super important. It's part of meeting voters where they are, being able to connect the lived experience that young next generation leaders have with the policies that they're putting forward to tackle these problems in a format that people can actually connect with, and then being able to distribute that more broadly through other maybe more traditional sorts of media, I think is a really important part of how we're going to get back to political power.